We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. Subscribe and follow on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, where you get exclusive videos weekly. And make sure you visit the Booked on Rock website, online at bookedonrock.com. David Paton is this episode's guest to talk about his book, Magic, the David Paton Story. David is the singer, songwriter, and bass player with the group Pilot. He's written the worldwide hits January, Just a Smile, and the biggest of them all, Magic. You've heard this song in movies, TV commercials, television shows. It's everywhere. He was a member of the Alan Parsons Project for 10 years and did session work with the Pretenders, Paul McCartney, Kate Bush, Chris de Burgh, Chris Ray, and Jimmy Page. He spent 3 years touring the world and recording as bassist for Elton John. In fact, he was in Elton's band when he performed at 1985's Live Aid. He has some amazing stories to tell about the creation of the hit singles Magic and January, Elton John's Nikita, the Pretenders' I'll Stand By You, and what it was like recording with Jimmy Page and Kate Bush. They're all part of his brand new book, Magic, the David Paton Story, and they're all in this episode. To hear David Paton's music, including Pilot, the Alan Parsons Project, Elton John, and the Pretenders, head over to the show notes page. But first, here is David Paton. David, welcome to the podcast. Great to meet you.
Good to meet you as well. Nice to see you, Eric.
So much to get to here, but let's start with your childhood days. Let's start where it all begins before you get into music. You were a cowboy. You were an Indian. You were quite the adventurous boy, and as you say, somewhat accident-prone. Where did you grow up, and what was your childhood like?
I grew up in Edinburgh, and as far as I was concerned, I had a happy childhood. And the memories I have, I've tried to jot down as much as I can in the book about what it was like growing up in Edinburgh in the 1950s. And there's been a few changes since then, but I just remember these happy times, dressing up like a cowboy and then an Indian and various other things. I had lots of friends during that time, and I lived on a kind of community area. So, we had the rule of the place. We used to go sledging down the main streets on the estate in the winter time, which is something you can't do now. That's another memory that I recall. Just great fun growing up, right through my school days, and learning to play the guitar when I was 11 years old as well.
That's what I was going to ask. When you fell in love with music, 11 years old, it was in Spain, right? In the midst of a yearly event called Running of the Poles. What an interesting way to realize you love music. Could you tell this story?
Yeah, sure. My parents had a vacation in Spain, and it wasn't just the parents. It was a big family event. There was cousins, aunties, and uncles. We all went en masse to the north of Spain, a place called Fonterrabia, and they have a running of the bulls through the street. So I was 11 years old, and I wasn't aware that these bulls were going to be running, but suddenly I heard all the commotion and the noise and all the people running. So I decided to run out the way, and I ran into a doorway, and these bulls came thundering past, chasing the people and throwing them up in the air.
What a crazy! And they still do it. It's still going on these days. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. So after all that commotion went by, there was a lull, a kind of silence, and I could hear a guitar in the distance, and I was fascinated by this. I knew it was being played live, so I just took a few steps, and there, sitting on a windowsill, was a young boy, probably the same age as me, 11 years old, and he was playing a Spanish guitar. I was absolutely mesmerized by what he was doing, and I sat on the sidewalk, the sun beating down, the jacaranda trees, I still remember it, and I listened to this guy. He played for about 10 minutes or so, and then someone called his name and off he went. I went back to the hotel to my parents and I said, I want a Spanish guitar. I want a guitar. Please buy me a guitar. They did. They bought me a guitar. I still remember the guitar, the look, the smell of the wood. All these things are still a vivid memory for me. And somehow it made its way back to Edinburgh in the hold of the plane in a cardboard box. And that was me. I was hooked on the guitar from that point on.
And who were the bands and the artists that you loved growing up?
I would go back as far as saying the Beatles and the Stones. All these bands that emerged in the early 60s were a big influence on me. Before then, it was music that my parents would listen to, probably Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra and whatnot. And, I was still drawn to that music not as much as the Beatles. I think the Beatles were just mind-blowing at that time to discover guys that could make music like that and writing their own songs. It was such an influence on the way things went for me in the future.
And before Pilot, you were a member of the Bay City Rollers, which is interesting. That was a short stint. You had a great time with the guys in the band, but you say that you wanted to pursue the type of music that you were listening to at the time, right?
That's right. Yeah. When I discovered bands like Yes, Genesis, King Crimson, I was drawn to that kind of music. I loved the musicianship of music, of that progressive music. It blew my mind, that kind of, the sheer mastery of their instruments and the quality of the music. And I found, Chris Squire, the bass player with Yes, was a big influence on me, so much so that I bought a Rickenbacker bass, like Chris's bass. And I'd listen to him playing and try and emulate what he was doing. So it helped my ear a lot to listen to the bands and try and play what they were playing, just using my ear.
How much of those bands were played on the radio where you were growing up?
Oh, they weren't. No, not at all.
Right, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, it was difficult to discover music like that. It was usually by me visiting friends that we would gather and just listen to music, and somebody would say, "Oh, have you heard this album?" And maybe be a Yes album. Oh, I'll have to buy that. So that's the way it went for me.
Yeah, because radio stations at the time were looking for the 3-minute singles.
They were. There was a show by a DJ by the name of John Peel.
Oh yeah, yeah.
He would experiment with the music, and he was given a free hand to do and play whatever he wanted. That was always an interesting show to listen to.
Yeah. And you write in the book, quote, "Now, I'm not a great believer in coincidence, but I do believe that sometimes things just fall into place." How does Pilot form?
Well, you mentioned the Bay City Rollers earlier. A guy who joined the Bay City Rollers was the keyboard player in Pilot. His name was Billy Lyle. Sadly, he's no longer with us. He passed in 1989. So Billy Lyle was a big influence on me, and I left the Bay City Rollers while he was still in them. But we had a great musical relationship, and he was heavily into classical music. And I had an interest in that as well, playing Spanish guitar. I loved what Segovia was doing. I loved how Bach's music could be interpreted for guitar. And Billy helped me a lot with my sight reading, took me to intermediate level. So Billy and I had a great musical relationship together. We'd play music together all the time. And when I left the Rollers, I still continued to go to the library to access written music. And I bumped into Billy one time at the library, and he told me he was working in a studio in Edinburgh, Craig Hall Studios. And would I be willing to go down and play bass for him and guitar on the songs he was writing? And he said, "Are you writing songs?" I said, "Well, not really." He says, "Well, write a song and come down and I'll play piano for you." So that's where Pilot started. We started playing on each other's songs, and eventually Billy would say, "We'll make it every Wednesday. We'll come down to the studio, have a song ready for Wednesday." So there was the incentive to write a song and have it ready for the recording in Craig Hall.
Songwriting. So you didn't you hadn't written a song at that time. When do you realize I can write a song? Because that's a gift not every musician has. I mean, there are great musicians who can play their instruments, but writing a great song.
Sure.
That's
And my
another thing.
first band, when I was 17, we had a publishing deal. We were signed to CBS Records at the time, and we had a publishing deal, and the publishers would give us songs and say, what do you like for your next single? It would play us 2 or 3 songs. We'd pick a song. Eventually, we started rejecting a lot of the songs that they were presenting to us, and they said, well, you'll have to write your own songs. And as I said, the Beatles were such a big influence on me, and realizing that they wrote their own songs, I had to try it. Of course, like everything, when you first start, if you want to paint, your first painting is going to be terrible. So I think my first song must have been really bad. But eventually, to keep at it and keep going, you do eventually write a song. I can remember when I wrote a song called Just a Smile, and I thought to myself, I've written a proper song now and something that I'm proud of. And it just developed that way.
Yeah, Just a Smile would end up being the very first single of your
Correct.
career, right? That's the first single of your entire career. Yeah, it's fascinating. You said, I think, in the book, too, without the Beatles, you would never have written a song like Magic.
I loved the Beatles' songwriting. They had perfected the art of writing music, and they had influences from the 40s and 50s that carried on in their music. So the same with me when I listened to the Beatles. That went into my head. Also, lucky for me, I'm listening to Yes and Genesis, and that goes into my head, and it comes out of my head, and as you say, in your own interpretation.
Yeah, now that first Pilot album, it's titled From the Album of the Same Name, released in the fall of 1974 under the EMI label. It's produced by Alan Parsons, who would become a big part of your career in the years to come. It was recorded at Abbey Road Studio 2. The lead single, Just a Smile, the one you just mentioned. Now, that did okay, but the follow-up single is a massive hit, and that is Magic. You know, I asked people about that song. I've been bringing up the fact that I'll be interviewing you, and I said, you know, he wrote that song, oh, 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 it's magic. And it's an immediate response. Like they'll say, oh, God, I remember the first time I heard that. That reminds me of, or, you know, I play that for my kids and they love it. To have a song like that, to go on from generation to generation, that's got to be such a huge gift.
Oh, it is. You know, and the song's coming up for 50 years old now.
Wow.
I never expected that it would have legs that it's got, the longevity. And even my grandkids, you know, they're proud to introduce me to their friends and say, oh, this is my granddad. He wrote Magic, you know, and the guys go, wow, you wrote that song, brilliant, you know.
Absolutely.
I even met a few artists that have congratulated me on writing the song. So for me, that is a big thrill to have people that you admire say to you.
Among them, a guy named Brian Wilson. Not bad. Not bad at all. Yeah, and it's co-written with your bandmate Billy Lyle. You write you write about composing the 4 bars on piano. And then after that, the challenge was getting the right verse. Can you share with us how that verse came to you?
Yeah, well, as you say, I had the chorus. I had this little chorus that just went, oh, ho, ho, it's magic, you know. Never believe it's not so. It's only 4 bars. And I used to sit at my piano with a cassette recorder above the piano. And every time I wrote something, even something that was just 4 bars, I would press record and record that little 4-bar piece, then move on to something else. So that little piece was on my cassette player, waiting for a verse to come along. I had to get up early one morning as the sun was rising, and I accidentally woke my wife up as I was getting up. And she said to me, wow, look, I've never been awake to see the daybreak. And suddenly I heard it as a melody, and my little magic chorus came into my head, and I thought, this little line, I've never been awake to see the daybreak. Well, I modified it a little bit, never been awake, never seen a daybreak. But I knew there and then I had a full song. Most songs, you only need a verse and a chorus. Sometimes you'll add a middle 8, but Magic didn't need the middle 8. And that was it.
It's like the dam broke, and all of a sudden the creative juices start flowing from there. That's so cool.
Yeah, I usually get it from something that somebody says to me. and just a little line, or even, I wrote a song called Love Is, which was based on the little notepad that you used to get, and it said Love Is in the corner. Little things like that. It's always something somebody says, and you just think, oh, that sounds like it could be a song.
So you have to let it come to you. You can't really force something like that. You just kind of keep an open mind.
Yeah, you have to be receptive to it. It's like a door opening in your head. For me, it's like a door opening in my head, but the door up above my head has to open as well, and in it comes. It's like being fed with something.
Fascinating. Yeah. The single went #1 in Canada, top 5 in the US, number 11 in the UK. And to this day, like I said, people love the song. And Brian Wilson told you in 2011 when he met you that he wished he wrote it. And then even the nurses who took care of you many years later mentioned this song. This is great. Can you tell the story? This is your hospital visit in 2006.
Yeah. I had to have a camera inserted into my urethra. And it was a slightly embarrassing procedure that the nurses try to put you at ease. There's always one at your side. So was saying to me, so Mr. Paton, did you take the day off work today? Yes, I took the day off work. She said, what do you do? I said, oh, I'm a musician. I have my own studio. Well, have you recorded anyone famous? I said, well, I've recorded Nobby Clark. He used to sing with the Bay City Rollers. She says, oh, I've met Les McEwen. I said, oh, I met Les in Australia when I was on tour. Oh, you were on tour? What do you tour? I said, well, I was with my own band, Pilot. Pilot, she says, I know that name. Wasn't that the song Magic? I said, yeah, that's the song. So she started to sing, oh, ho, ho, it's magic. Meanwhile, I'm lying there with a gown on.
With a gown, yeah.
So they could have access to this. and the nurses were singing this song to me. It was kind of embarrassing. And then over my shoulder, I caught a glimpse of 2 other nurses who had appeared at the door. And they were both pointing at me and saying, that's him there. Oh, no.
That's so funny. Another big single was January. That was #1 in the UK for 3 weeks. What is the story behind the title of the song? It's often misunderstood that this is about the month January. That's not the case.
Yeah. As I said before, I'm always inspired by something that a person says. And this was the same situation. Again, it was my wife reading a book. And she said to me, this is a really good book. And the main character in the book is a girl called January. And that just kind of stuck in my head. And I thought, yeah, that is unusual. You do hear of girls' names like June and May and other examples. But January is quite unusual for a girl. And so I think the next time I just sat down at the piano to write a song, that word January was still in my subconscious. So when I played my first song, that was the first word that came out.
And unfortunately, your partnership with Billy didn't last. He was encouraged by other people to go into a solo career, and he did. You did carry on with only 3 wheels on the wagon, as you write it in the book, but that wasn't easy continuing without Billy in the band. And then by 77, Pilot is no more. And from reading the book, I get the feeling that there was much more that the band could have done. You say it just wasn't one thing that led to the breakup. It's kind of the usual things that lead to many band breakups.
Yeah, I think Billy was dissatisfied that none of his songs were released as singles. You mentioned that I wrote the song Magic with Billy. Well, that wasn't strictly true because we were emulating what the Beatles did and calling the compositions Paton Lyle, like McCartney.
Okay, I wondered about that because I saw the co-writing credit there, but reading the book, it seemed like it was all you.
Yeah, so on the first album, we decided we'd both take credit for songs that I wrote as an individual and songs that Billy wrote as an individual. We only did that for the first album. But that was one of the reasons that Billy left. And he was also being encouraged to leave by his friends and the management, who could see, oh, we can get him a deal. And that means more money for them. So it was all wrong. I wish I had protested a bit more than I did. But that's gone now. And also, I don't think they realised that Billy was an inspiration to me. You know, when Billy wrote a song, I always thought, oh, I've got to try and write a song better than that. And that competition was taken away when Billy left the band. But not only that, there was a lot of demand put on us for session work because people listened to Pilot music and they would think, oh, I really like that guitar player, or I really like that bass player. Let's try and get him on a session. So session work became very important to myself, and that kind of took me away from Pilot and our management problems, which were just a headache. I wanted away from that anyway.
Yeah.
It was just a natural progression to go into the session work, which, you know, I enjoyed that because I'm not a natural frontman. And for me, it caused me a lot of problems emotionally, mentally, having to front the band. I couldn't really cope with it. So to have that escape route into session work, I just thought, this is more of where I want to be.
Yeah, and you did land the gig as bassist and vocalist for the Alan Parsons Project. You're on 9 studio albums recorded between 1976 and 1985. And there are so many hit singles that you're a part of. Correct me if I got any of these wrong or if I'm missing any here, but just I ran through them. The System of Dr. Tar and Professor Feather, I Wouldn't Want to Be Like You, Day After Day, The Show Must Go On, Damned If I Do, Games People Play, which is a huge one, Time, Eye in the Sky is another big one around here in the States, Don't Answer Me, Prime Time, over 50 million albums worldwide sold. And you had a great time with the band. I think it's because of what you just said. You didn't have to have that pressure of being up front. You get to just have fun making music.
That's it. And when we did the first album with Alan, Tales of Mystery and Imagination, it was Pilot in the studio. The 4 of us played on that album and Alan was at the helm. So, you know, it seemed like I felt very comfortable with that setup and recording in Abbey Road as well. It was just a natural progression for me. And as you know, it was very successful because we were all so compatible together. We'd all worked together. It was only Eric Wilson that was brought in on keys that was an extra member. And Eric was just like us, also a Scot. So, you know, it was just fun in the studio and very creative. We would spend a lot of time on just putting one track together, probably a whole day, a whole 12-hour day, just putting one backing track together. Quite meticulous, but look at the rewards. It was worth it.
You talk about the routine for recording albums in the book. You say they were open-ended, no stop time.
That's right. Yeah, we stopped when we were tired or when the sun came up. You know, just open-ended sessions. So you've got the studio 24 hours a day if you can work that hard. I think putting in 12 to 14 hours is enough for everybody. And your ears get tired as well, especially when you're sitting in a studio. You know this yourself. When you've got the headphones on, they can irritate your ears and cause a bit of tinnitus. And also the top end can kind of dulls down a bit, you know, so you miss that presence when you've had your headphones on for a long time. It can be tiring, and just going through the one song over and over again. Eventually, it was a mutual thing. We would all say, shall we call it a day? Yeah, okay, see you tomorrow at 12 o'clock.
There are a lot of people here in the States, I know, and I would think it's the same in other countries as far as the sports arenas, that they hear a particular song by the Alan Parsons Project and may not even know that it's them, but it's that, and that's that usually leads as the players are rushing out into the field. That's the opening to Eye in the Sky, right?
Right.
Do you remember how that song came up? What are your memories of recording that song?
I remember recording Eye in the Sky, and I remember that Alan wasn't too keen on it. He thought, Eric was insisting, this song's going to be our next single. Alan was saying, no, I don't see it as a single. And I think the rest of us could see it as a single. But Alan had a bet with Eric. I don't know how much, but they said, right, let's have a wager on this. I bet this is going to be a hit. Eric said. Alan said, I bet it's not. Well, there you are. It was a huge hit. And it was one of the songs that came together really quickly in the studio. It was as if Alan just wanted to get out of the way. let's get this one over and done with. So we maybe spent a few hours on it, getting the backing track right. When I say backing track, I mean a really good drum take, a good bass take, piano and guitar. That was it. And then we move on to the next track.
Yeah, and that opening instrumental part is called Serious, and then it goes into Eye in the Sky, right?
That's right. That was recorded separately, but we knew it was going to butt into Eye in the Sky. It was going to be a kind of introduction, but only for the album, not for single release. The single release was without Serious.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. Kate Bush has seen a resurgence thanks to her song in the Netflix series Stranger Things. You played bass, acoustic guitar on her debut album, The Kick Inside from 1978, and the follow-up 1979's Lionheart. What was your first impression of her talents, and what was that experience like working with her?
I'd done a few sessions by the time I did the Kate Bush session, but I remember we didn't hear anything beforehand. Andrew Powell was producing the album, and we were just invited along to, it was Air Studios, which was George Martin's studio in Oxford Circus in London. And we just turned up and we met this young girl. We knew she was going to be a young girl, a good songwriter and whatnot. Andrew just said to her, will you sit down at the piano and play the guys the song you're going to play? Meanwhile, he handed us notes for the song. And she sat and played the song note perfectly and with a beautiful voice, like an English rose. She was just fantastic. And we were all pretty knocked out, pretty mesmerized by the charisma of Kate. So for us, we knew this is going to be really big. And it was massive.
David Paton is here to talk about his amazing career, all covered in his book titled Magic. And you've worked with so many talented artists, among them Jimmy Page. You were part of his Death Wish 2 soundtrack sessions in 1981, and the album was released in early 1982. This was a new experience for you, playing along to a movie playback. What was that like, and how was it to work with Jimmy?
It was my friend Dave Mattox, a drummer, who worked with Fairport Convention for a long, long time. And Dave and I did a lot of sessions together. And Dave phoned me up and said, oh, I've got a session with Jimmy Page and I've put you forward for it. Are you up for it? I said, yeah, I'd love to do it. And eventually Jimmy phoned me and we arranged the time to go down. There was a bit of a mix-up initially, but we sorted it out. And
you stressed out a little bit over that one. Where were you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because I live 400 miles away from London. I live in Edinburgh. So I had to jump in a car and take my amp and guitars and all that down to London. And he had got the dates mixed up. But we sorted it out. And when I arrived there, he was there to greet me at the door. And very friendly, very down to earth. But most of these guys are, these icons that you look up to, and you're actually nervous at meeting them. I was really nervous at meeting Jimmy because I went back a long way with listening to the music that he created with Led Zeppelin, etc. And it was just wonderful to sit down and work with a guy of that stature. So, it would just be, here's the song, and he would play his demo. And we'd all listen and say, yeah, sounds good, let's do it. And we would just play and play and play. And a great honor, a great pleasure to sit and put music together with Jimmy Page. Wonderful.
Yeah, it must have been just to sit there and watch him work was a treat for you.
Yeah, and the sounds, the playing. He had pedals at that time, which were pretty new on the market. When he pressed the pedal, he would play a chord. It would take the chord up an octave, and you can hear that in the music of the Death Wish 2. So he was playing with this quite a bit. There was a lot of experimental stuff going on. At one point, there was a creepy scene, and he said, "We need something really creepy here." And either he suggested or I suggested, why don't I run a penny up the fretboard of the strings? With the volume full up, and just run the penny up the strings, which gives it a really creepy sound. And if you put a bit of reverb on that, that's it. It set the scene, and it was just perfect for the scene. But that's just one example of the experimentation that was going on during that session, which makes it a great joy to do that when you're being creative on the spot.
Yeah, a lot of that back in the day. Nowadays, with all the technology and the advancements, like I'm even thinking nowadays you wouldn't even have had to pack up all of your stuff and get on a plane and get there. You could do it virtually, I suppose. But there are some artists who don't prefer that. Would you prefer being in the same room with a musician?
I always prefer 4 or 5 musicians to play together. There's nothing like it. It's like playing live as well. There's a great buzz to be had from that. But as you say, technology has moved on, and now I work with a Japanese band, and we just send the files to each other back and forward. It can still be very satisfying and creative because I get to play what I want to play, and they'll do the same at their end. So I'll send them my contribution, and then they'll do the final mix and send it back. And I'm always happy and surprised at the work that we put together. It doesn't sound like I've been sitting in my room on my own playing bass or singing or whatnot. It sounds like we're a proper band.
What are your thoughts on AI? This is becoming a big story in the music world. Just the fact that you can take David Paton vocals and get enough of it together for this computer system to just all of a sudden simulate your voice and write a song all on its own. I mean, does that concern you, or because I always feel you still can't ever take away from the human element. I don't think you can ever have, like, some are worried it's going to take over.
Yeah, some are worried it'll take over. I don't know. I mean, we've seen examples of movies that depict it in the future, and to me it's very scary because we've seen the advancements over the last few years, especially just recently. And even a lot of the people involved in it, like Elon Musk, they're frightened of it, and quite rightly. And I think I am too. I find it a bit frightening what they can do. But there again, it's just an interpretation of what they hear. I've heard the Beatles singing "God Only Knows," for instance.
Yes, I heard that one too. Yeah, it's on the internet. Yeah,
and it's creepy. I just don't like it.
But it does lack. There's a certain human element that you can't hear in those recordings, if you want to call them a recording, but whatever it is. But it's just there's something lacking there. And you'd hope that we come to our senses enough to realize, like when COVID hit, or actually I remember when Amazon started to become a thing, and maybe early 2000s, late 90s, and I remember somebody saying, "Hey, someday nobody's going to have to go to the store anymore. Nobody's going to have to go." I'm like, yeah, but I mean, you got to get out there and interact with people. I mean, you can't just be all alone in your house. There's got to be a little bit of a balance there.
Sure, and I find what I've heard, the music lacks expression and emotion. These things that seem to be missing. They may be able to interpret the sounds, but the emotion isn't there.
And how would you take that on the road? How do you have a concert with that? There's nothing you can do with that. Well, I guess you could again do the hologram.
Yeah, I know. I've seen McCartney bring John Lennon on stage.
Right. Well, we'll see. Another artist you worked with is a guy by the name of Elton John. I have heard of him. This comes amidst a busy 1985. Can you talk about how that came about and the dream you had of Elton just before all this went down?
Yeah, I had a dream about Elton John, which I do sometimes dream, and it's very vivid, and I can remember dreams that I had 40 years ago, and I can still bring them back. And this was one of these dreams of me. I was just jumping over maybe 2 or 3 foot high walls, and behind me I could see Elton John, and it was like he was pursuing me, but he was smiling. It was a kind of happy, like a game, jumping over these walls, and Elton was behind me, smiling. And I woke up and I remembered the dream. And within 2 or 3 weeks of having that dream, I had a phone call from a secretary who said to me, "David Paton, are you available for a session at Sol Studios and Maidenhead on such and such a day?" I said, "Yes, I'm free." "Okay, can you be there for midday?" I said, "Okay, fine." She said, "Okay then." I said, "Oh, just a minute. Who's the artist?" She said, "Oh, the artist's Elton John." I thought, what a coincidence that is, that I should dream. I never actually told him that I had that dream. I should have. So I went along to the session, and Dave Mattox, the drummer, again, he was on that session, and he was setting up, and I was setting up, and we were chatting together. Meanwhile, Elton John appeared. I didn't know he had entered the room as I was leaning over the drum booth talking to Dave. Then I felt the presence at my shoulder. I turned around, Elton was there in my face. Hello, I'm Elton John. Oh, really?
Yeah, man. And you played bass on tracks from the Ice on Fire album, including one of my favorite Elton songs, which is Nikita. And your bass line is like right up in the mix, which I love. Brilliant bass work. And you write about that song in the book. All that went down on the first day you met him, right?
That's right. Yeah. And in fact, it was just after the meeting that I mentioned to you there. Dave Mattox said, I'm going for a coffee. I'll be back in a minute. So that just left Elton and I in the studio. And I said to Elton, I'm just going to tune up my bass. So I went over picked up my fretless bass first, which I didn't intend to use on any particular song. I just wanted to tune it. So I tuned it up. And as I was tuning it, Elton sat down at the piano and started playing a few chords. And I realized he wants me to play along to these chords. They were chords of a song that I didn't recognize, but I played along with them. And he kept looking up at me and acknowledging that, I was probably on the right track. And eventually, after 20 minutes or so, he said, "That's great, David." He said, "We're going to record that song now. I'll just see if Gus is ready. Are you ready, Gus?" And Gus said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, let's record the song." And then walked a guy called Nick Kershaw. I don't know if you know of that name.
I know the name.
Yeah, he was playing guitar on the song. Dave Mattox, myself, and Elton, and we recorded the song. And Elton seldom does more than 2 takes. So within 2 takes, that was the song done, finished.
Wow. Yeah, what a great groove that has too. Great groove.
Yeah.
Beautiful song. And you played Elton's Live Aid set on July 13th, 1985 at Wembley Stadium. You played in front of, 72,000 people in attendance? I mean, yeah, can you even put into words what that experience is like?
If you take in the people that were watching on the television, you're talking millions.
Yes.
So that would be my biggest audience of any concert. For me, it was just a thrill to go on the stage with Elton John and start playing I'm Still Standing. You just think, oh, wow, I'm actually here. I was just so thrilled. That was the biggest emotion I had, just the thrill of being on stage with Elton John in front of a huge audience that were all going crazy for Elton. You couldn't wish for a better situation as a musician.
I'm sure you ran into a lot of musicians too.
I did. I met, I saw McCartney coming in. I saw Cat Stevens. I sat down at a table with Cat Stevens, who didn't perform, but he was just there to taking the vibe, I suppose. And lots of people, they were all sitting about under parasols, having a drink or whatever, and just chatting. So, it was just everywhere you looked, it was a personality. It was somebody that you knew. And George Michael, in fact, he sang at Live Aid with Elton. And of course, during rehearsals, George was there. And I saw Elton talking to George and saying they were pointing towards me as I was sitting on the stage. And George come walking towards me. And he said to me, "David, I just wanted to let you know that January was a big influence on my life. Thanks for writing that song." And that was just another thrilling moment of somebody of a huge stature telling me they liked something that I did. I really got off on that.
Freddie Mercury, of course, Queen, that legendary performance. You did have a meeting with Freddie prior to that. Freddie was quite competitive.
He was very competitive. And when Pilot signed to EMI Records in 1974, Queen signed to EMI Records at the same time, along with another band called Cockney Rebel. They signed as well. And to commemorate that, EMI introduced a new label. It was just a new label for the singles. And because it was a new label, they were obviously hoping that one of these bands would get a number one song on this new label. Unknown to me, Freddie was in competition with Cockney Rebel and Pilot to get a number one first. Unfortunately for Freddie, January reached number one before Queen had the number one, and also Cockney Rebel had a number one before Queen as well. So he was very disgruntled at that. And I remember I did the Top of the Pops, and Queen were on the bill as well. And I was playing January. Of course, Pilot were playing January. And after the show, we went to the bar, and I was in the bar talking to a few people when I saw Freddie walking in with one of his minders, and he was looking at me kind of in an unfriendly way. And so I walked over to him and I said, "How you doing, Freddie? It's nice to meet you," and blah, blah, blah. And he said, "I don't know why you're bothering talking to me." I said, "Why not?" He says, "Because when I'm number one, I won't talk to you." And he stormed off. He minced off.
Did you see him around Live Aid? Did you see him backstage? Because that was a huge performance for them.
I watched the performance. I didn't actually see him backstage, but I watched the performance. There was
Did you know like this is a special performance? Did you feel it?
Not really. I was more hooked on what Bowie did. I thought Bowie's performance was fantastic. You know? And Freddie, yeah, that's the iconic look of Freddie Mercury is the Live Aid performance. I realise that now. It was the same with when I first heard Bohemian Rhapsody. I never thought this is groundbreaking stuff. I just thought, wow, this is really unusual. Yeah, but where's the chorus? There isn't really a chorus in the song.
Well, that was the label's concern too. You know, where's the chorus? Well, how can we put this on the radio?
Exactly, but they took a chance and it just went mega.
You're right about David Bowie. The performance of Heroes. He does Heroes in that set, from what I recall. I think that was What are your favorite Bowie songs?
Oh, I think Let's Dance is one of my favorites.
Oh, yes.
And I love Oh You Pretty Things. I love the Honky Dory album. I think that was my first introduction to really enjoying what Bowie was doing. And also my friend Rick Wakeman was playing on that album. Great piano playing. I just thought the songs on that album were just fantastic.
Yeah, talk about Rick Wakeman. You worked with him quite a bit.
I did. And again, that was just a friend of mine who owned the studio, and Rick was using the studio. In fact, he managed Rick Wakeman, and he said to me, "Oh, would you come along and play bass for Rick? He needs a bass part on one of his songs." I said, "Yeah, okay." So I arrived at the studio, and Rick was there, very friendly, very chatty, very funny.
I was going to say, sense of humor, very funny guy.
A very funny guy. There was a few things happened that I couldn't put in the book because they were just a bit close to the bone. But a very funny guy, and he played me the song. And I'm listening to this. If you're aware of Rick Wakeman music, you try and count 1, 2, 3, 4. It never goes like that with Rick's music. It'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 2. You know, it's just all over the place. It's like, how can you count this? So I'm presented with a piece of music, and he says, "Just play along with it. Play what you want, and I'll come back in 20 minutes." Off he went and left me to this. And I just looked at the engineer and said, "Where do I start?" But I did work my way through it and managed to finish the song. And he came back and he said, "That's exactly what I wanted. Perfect." He says, "Will you play on the rest of the album?" I said, "Yeah, okay." And I went on to have a long relationship with Rick. So far that we dropped the band that we were touring with, and we went on tour, just the two of us, playing and interpreting his music in a classical way, and even performing Eleanor Rigby in a classical way, which is now a big hit on YouTube, taken from one of the live concerts that we played together.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. You're on the recording for I'll Stand By You. This is a huge hit by the Pretenders, 1993. You played bass on this one. And you recall that session in the book. Chrissy Hyde had some great stories to share, and she has a really good Bob Dylan impression.
Yes, she's fantastic, Bob Dylan. I think Bob and her are very close friends, as far as I know. She did a great impression of him, and also used some of his sayings and the way he spoke. She had it off pat. She had it off perfectly. And I was booked just to play on 2 songs. And when Chrissy arrived at the studio, she listened to what I did on I'll Stand By You, and she said to the engineer, "Oh, let's have David play on some more of these songs." And she picked up the tape box and said, "Look, get him to play on." She named about 6 songs. She says, "I'll come back in a couple of hours and see how you're doing." So off she went and left me to it. And I played on the 6 songs, enjoyed the songs. And by the way, I had just started working with Rick at the time, and a tour was set up, ready to go. So she came back into the studio and she said to the engineer, "Tell David I would like him to join the band, the Pretenders." So she did, and the engineer came in and said, "Chrissy would like you to join the band." I said, "I can't. I'm committed to working with." There was no contract, I could have said to Rick, "Forget it, I'm working with Chrissy now." But I felt a loyalty to Rick, so I had to say no to Chrissy. I wish I'd maybe considered it and said to her, "I'll see what I can do." Instead, I just said, "I can't. The tour's ready to go. I can't drop out."
But I think you still made the right call. You have the loyalty to somebody, because then what if you did just jump right on it, and then what's Rick going to think? Yeah, you did say that there was a chance to chat with Chrissy again a few years later, and that didn't happen.
That was I think it's called the VH1 Awards.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
I was doing that with Elton. I had been asked to go back with Elton. I worked with Elton basically in the late 80s, but I was asked to go back with him in the 90s, 96, I think it was, and tour America and South America. And one of the gigs was the VH1 Awards. And Chrissy was on the bill as well with the Pretenders. And Elton said to me, "Oh, I see Chrissy's here. I think I'll go down and say hello to her." And I said to him, "Oh, I know Chrissy. Maybe I could come with you." He said, "Okay." So the both of us wandered along to Chrissy's dressing room. And Elton knocked on the door. And this big burly guy with a dinner jacket on opens the door and said, "Yeah." And Elton said, "Oh, I'd just like to say hello to Chrissy." He says, "Hold on." And he closed the door. I could hear him walking away. Elton looking at me, wondering what's going on. The door opened again, and the guy said, "Chrissy has a headache." And he slammed the door again. Wow. And Elton just looked at me and burst out laughing, as if, he just don't do that.
Yeah. Man, jeez, that couldn't have had anything to do with you not joining her band. I hope not.
I've often wondered.
Hey, a couple more questions on Elton, because you were on that Melbourne Symphony Orchestra show in Australia that was recorded, and it's got just that phenomenal version of Candle in the Wind. That was a set of shows you did with him, right?
Yeah, it was. In fact, we traveled from, I think it was Adelaide to Perth in Australia in a jumbo jet. The whole orchestra, the band, and Elton's entourage, we hired or rented a jumbo jet to take us from Adelaide. I think Elton performed Candle in the Wind solo, because he did a solo set before the band joined him along with the orchestra. So maybe I'd done Candle. I might be wrong. It was a long set. It was a 3-hour set. On the level of Bruce Springsteen, who was here just a couple of nights ago.
Was he?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, and that's gone down really well in Edinburgh. That tour was just so memorable, and the sound quality of the live performance is just second to none. And again, that's Gus Dudgeon, who's worked with or produced Elton on many occasions. Madman Across the Water and whatnot. Gus Dudgeon and Clive Franks, they mixed the orchestra and the band together, and it's wonderful. It really is a wonderful concert.
The last question regarding Elton was, you worked with him, I think, while he was still having substance abuse problems, but then you worked with him after that. What was the biggest difference you noticed between working with Elton in the 80s and then again in the 90s?
Well, it seemed that everyone had cleaned up their act. When Elton cleaned up their act, they did the same. I found that a bit stellar. And to go back to Elton and play a concert in front of 15,000 people or so, and then come off stage and go straight to the hotel and into the room, silence on my own. I just thought, this isn't the way it used to be. There was always a party after the show. And I found that very frustrating. And so I just wandered down to the bar. And there, sitting in the bar, was Davy Johnson with a bucket with champagne in it. And he had his roll-up cigarettes. And I just thought, this is the real rock and roll guy. This is how it should be. So I found a big difference. Everybody walking about with a bottle of water instead of a bottle of vodka.
Yeah. You never had that problem, though. You never had any problems with drugs and alcohol. You were able
No. Well, I did it. I experimented, but I never got hooked on anything. Nah.
In the early 2000s, you moved to Spain, but you did return to Scotland, something that a clairvoyant predicted you would do. Clairvoyancy it runs in the family, too, with your dad.
It does. My dad, my grandparents, they all indulged in it. I don't know if this is because, it came about in America, in fact. I think in the early 1920s or so, it became a huge thing. And it had a big influence probably worldwide. But my dad told me that his grandparents had really in-depth seances where they would have materialization and ectoplasm and all this kind of stuff, And I found that a bit unbelievable. But then my dad said that he also had that gift, but he refused to use it. He thought it was not right to try and contact the afterlife, if there is such a thing. He didn't believe that he should be doing it. It went against his religious beliefs, I suppose. But we once visited a clairvoyant who they would have open sessions in Edinburgh. You would go to the town hall. There would be a seance of some sort, and they would always point to my dad and say, "You have the gift. Why don't you use it?" My dad said, "No, I don't want to use it at all." But I visited a very famous medium in Edinburgh when I was, maybe it might have been the late 70s or early 80s. And she said, you've had a bit of success in the past, but you're going to have a bigger success than the success you've already had. And I relate that to the Elton John era, of success, because you don't get much more successful than that. And I was a part of that. And she could see me sitting at a desk. She said, is it a crane that you drive or something? I can see you with lots of controls and whatnot. And I think she maybe saw a mixing desk of some sort. And she was, loads of little predictions that you just think, you could easily say that. But all these little things that she mentioned to me, they all came true. So there's something in it. I think there is something in it. But it's not something I'll indulge in.
Well, these days you've been very active with solo projects and collaborations with John Turner and Beagle Hat, which is now called Sheep. I love the song Medicine. I was telling you this before we started recording from your album 2020. Love that song. Tell us about the Magic Collection. This came out in 2022, last year. It's under the name Pilot. So what led you to flying the flag for Pilot once more, as you write in the book?
Well, I'm aware of the fact that I'm getting a lot older now, and I'm in my 70s now. And, nothing's forever. I've always had that attitude. Nothing's forever. And eventually you have to give things up. And one of these things, I suppose, is touring. I've kind of thought, I've done a lot of touring and I'll give it up. But the songwriting is something that I don't want to stop doing. I get so much pleasure out of it. That, for me, that is my spiritual clairvoyance, if you want to call it that. That's where I get the contact from, and I'll never give that up. So the songwriting is something I want to keep doing as much as possible until I just can't do it, and that could be, I don't know, I'm just until I can't do it. So the songwriting will always be there. I'll always want to write albums. It seems now that for guys of my era who used to put out CDs, that era has come to an end, and now it's download. It's something that I'll have to adjust to and get on board with if I wanted to continue. But occasionally I just put out songs on YouTube or Facebook and whatnot, and just say, here's a new song I've written. It's not on an album or anything. It's just there to listen to if you want it.
And what is the Magic Collection?
Yes, the Magic Collection is my return to Pilot. As I said, I started off saying, I'm getting to a certain age, and I thought there was a few things about the first album in particular of Pilot that I thought, I think I could do a better job of that song if I recorded it now. So I started by recording a couple of the songs and realizing that I sing in a much lower key now, and the songs seem to adapt to this deeper tone that I have now. So I recorded a few of the songs, and I thought this would be the perfect way to end my touring days and put out a Pilot album of Pilot songs. So that's what I've done, and I'm happy with that. I really like it.
And I guess the last question I have, just off the top of my head now, with the song Magic, everybody's got to go through you if they want, like if they want it in a movie or a commercial or a television show, right? They got to go through you. Do you get calls often for that? Like, hey, we want to use it in this, we want to use it in that.
And it's via my publishers. The publishers will be asked first because they kind of own the song, although 50%. People that want to use the song will approach them. If it's something controversial, or if it's a cover, says, I've had a lot of rap guys in particular, Florida, in fact, he's done a version of Magic. The publishers will send me what the artist wants to do, and I either approve it or say, I think this is a lot of rubbish. They're not entitled to any percentage, but let's let them use it. Sometimes it's from artists who have huge followings, so I'm going to say and the latest one is Ozempic, of course, which has just gone crazy. And they've asked me to re-record it, which I did. I went to Abbey Road with Ozempic with the crew. They flew 14 Americans over to Abbey Road to help with the re-recording of Magic and their interpretation. A lot of musicians might think, you're selling your soul, but as I say, I'm 73 now. I'm not selling my soul. I'm just, my song is still there. People still want to hear it. I'm happy. Yeah,
I never see it that way because I think about how many new fans. By the way, Ozempic is it's like a prescription medicine, right? For those who may not know, but I've seen that commercial many times. But I just feel like it introduces the music to a whole new generation of fans. So people become familiar with it, if not for it being on a commercial or a Netflix series or in a movie. And people are never, because radio is not as prominent as it once was. So these are the ways to get the music out there, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And that one's massive in the States, as you know. I get friends phoning me up and saying, do you know your song's being used? As if I didn't know. Right.
Yeah, I know. I'm aware. Yeah, well, that's cool, though. You get a good say in it, too. It's not like you say it's 50-50 with the publishers, but still, they come to you and say, what do you think? Yeah,
sometimes it could be cigarettes, like in Japan, it was Magic cigarettes. Okay. And I just say, well, people want to smoke. It doesn't matter if they hear Magic or not. They're still going to smoke. So.
Yeah. David, this is so great, man. I really enjoyed this. And the book Magic, it is out now through Sonic Bond, available wherever books are sold, Burning Shed in the UK, Amazon, everywhere. So where can people find you online?
They can find me at davidpaton.com or pilot-magic.com.
Okay, David, great meeting you. Thank you so much. This was awesome.
Great, Eric. Thanks.
That's it. It's in the books.